Hey, welcome back to Cain Course World History. If you've been following along, you know we've been covering the glory that was the ancient Roman Empire.
Cain, Rome's cool and all, but didn't it fall? Like, isn't that what it's famous for?
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad when my anonymous students just ask the perfect questions for this class. How did Rome fall? Well, it's a great question. I was walking down the stairs one day and it tripped and fell. Come on, give me a little bit of credit for that one. Well, Rome didn't actually fall in the sense that many historians say that it did, that there was one specific exact moment where it was just over. And while there was, Rome was more so on a steady decline. Because while it may seem that everything was great in Rome, there's some underlying problems for much of its history. It's kind of like if you see a fresh tray of cookies that smell good and look good from a distance, and then as you walk over, you grab one and you take a bite. It's not the chocolate chip that you expected. Instead, it's raisins. That's what Rome is. Don't let the military success fool you. It's really just hiding a bunch of raisins. So how did Rome steadily decline and not necessarily fall? Let's talk about that right now. Without knowing the details, most people, when they hear the term the fall of Rome, would picture something like this: the glorious city of seven hills suddenly burning and falling to ashes. And to a point, that assumption is correct. There will be multiple points where the city of Rome itself is invaded and burned. Yet again, this is more of a steady decline. There's numerous factors that lead to this actually happening. To find out exactly what we're looking at, let's look at a source from the actual time. Famed historian Tacitus said this: "They have plundered the world, stripping naked the land in their hunger. They are driven by greed if their enemy be rich, by ambition if poor. They ravage, they slaughter, they seize by false pretenses, and all of this they hail as the construction of empire. And when in their wake nothing remains but a desert, they call that peace." All right, time for a little audience participation. I want you to think about who you think Tacitus might be talking about. You ready? Go ahead and think. I'll wait. You got it? All right, hang on to that answer. We'll come back to it towards the end. We've got some other groundwork to lay first. When we last left Rome, the empire was flourishing in about the 300s or so. And for the most part, things were good in Rome. They had expanded to its height. They had a good system of government that combined both the old ideas of the Senate with the new ideas of empire and monarchy. Roman culture was diverse, pulling in all these different influences from around the world, much like the Macedonian Empire had done before it. And we specifically talked about the growing interest and popularity of Christianity. In fact, most of the Roman Empire at this point is becoming Christian, or at least tolerant of Christianity. But there are problems underneath all of this. And to unpack those, we have to go back a little bit before the time of Constantine, who we unpacked in our last video. In 180 AD, the death of Marcus Aurelius, the last of the five good emperors, signaled the end of the Pax Romana. Remember that period of almost 200 years of peace in Roman lands, and really the height of Roman civilization. For the next 100 years, Rome would lose its way. It would forget the basis of culture and education that it had grown upon, and the themes of strength and honor that had made sure that rulers were strong and that government was not only for the people, but it protected the people. Rome's downfall here is within its leadership. Over the next 100 years, Rome will have a number of different emperors, and most of them are pretty awful. In fact, over one 50-year period of time, Rome had 26 emperors. That number alone is wild, but it's even more crazy to think about how only one of them died of natural causes. The rest were all assassinated. So you have political turmoil and chaos within a very greedy system. Rome is literally destroying itself. And if that's not enough of a problem, Rome's policy of expanding or dying is literally causing the opposite to happen. Rome is falling apart because it's just too big to defend. The legions were great, but now they're filled with people who aren't necessarily even Roman, and they're even turning to mercenaries to try to defend their land. Rome is also struggling to produce enough food for its growing population in this empire that spans almost 2 continents. And on top of all of that, people who are hungry and are feeling a little bit upset about the way they're being treated are beginning to become more and more restless. Not to mention there's some exterior threats, but we'll get to that in a little bit. In the midst of all these crises, Diocletian becomes emperor in 284 AD, and he was dedicated to restoring power and control to the emperor and putting Rome back on the path to success. First and foremost, Diocletian was concerned with restoring the power and prestige of the emperor. He would dress in very fancy clothes, especially using the color purple, and building massive statues to honor himself and bring attention back to him. And with all these different ceremonies and pomp and circumstance, it was clear that Diocletian had absolute power and was willing to use it. That doesn't fix the fact that Rome still had all these problems and was becoming very hard to govern and rule for one emperor. So Diocletian does something very drastic and unprecedented. He splits the empire in two.
A house divided against itself cannot stand.
Hey, dude, buddy, I love you. You're my favorite president. But this is world history we're talking about. Get out of here. Although he kind of has a point. But anyway. That's right. Rome now consisted of two empires, the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. And Diocletian appointed a co-emperor to rule the West, and he took on the East, which was a little bit wealthier and safer compared to everything going on back home in Rome. Now, yes, of course, I'm sure you can see the writing on the wall. In the long run, this isn't necessarily going to preserve Rome. But in that specific moment for Diocletian, it was a solution to a problem that he couldn't solve on his own. Diocletian was also able to end problems with taxation and inflation, bring Rome back to its economic height. And Rome seems to be back trending towards its old self. And that's when, in 312, Constantine takes the throne in the East. We've already discussed the importance of Constantine in regards to Christianity. With the Edict of Milan in 313, he made Christianity not only legal in the Roman Empire, but a big part of the Roman Empire's culture, especially in the Eastern Empire. Under Constantine, the divide between the Eastern and Western empires only grew bigger, especially economically. It was clear that the East was better protected by land and had more resources to better survive. With the Eastern Empire becoming the true center of the glory of Rome, it's at this time that Constantine builds himself a new capital city, the city that will be known as Constantinople. At this point, it was known as Nova Roma, or New Rome. Eventually named Constantinople after Constantine himself, this city becomes one of the greatest of the classical world and beyond. Today it's known as Istanbul, and its location really sets it apart from other cities. It's located on the Bosporus Strait, right in between Turkey and Europe. It's literally half in the west and half in the east, and because of its location on water, it was always a great location for trade and crossroads. And on top of that, it had everything Rome had and more. And it also will become not only the center for Roman culture, but also the center of the Christian world. And the true trigger for the fall of Rome, especially the Western Empire, is, wait a second, what is it? That's right, you know what that sound means. Nomadic horse people. And in this case, it's a new group called the Huns. Yeah, kind of like in Mulan, but not really, but that's a whole nother thing. No, the Huns were nomadic, and they featured the horse heavily in their culture, and they were very skilled at combat from horseback, which allowed them to quick strike and raid very effectively. They also incited fear in their enemies. A series of conflicts in East Asia had sent the Huns in search of a new home in Europe in about 350 or so. And as the Huns came over, they displaced a number of other groups, people who the Romans considered to be barbarians because they weren't Roman. This will push these groups closer and closer to Rome itself. So because of this, Rome will be frequently raided by all these different groups, like the Goths and the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths and whatever other type of Goth you want to think of. It puts a lot of pressure on the Western Roman Empire. And the East stays relatively intact because Constantinople was better defended because it had the wealth and the resources to actually defend itself, unlike Western Rome. After humiliating the Western Romans at the Battle of Adrianople, the Visigoth leader Alaric was able to invade Rome itself and sack the city in 410. The resulting pillaging and burning of the city left Rome even weaker than it was before the barbarian invasions. It's at this point that Rome faces the greatest threat it has ever seen, a leader of the Huns named Attila, who the Christians called the Scourge of God. One of the most feared names in all of world history, Attila was determined to conquer most of Europe. In fact, he started with Constantinople first. And the emperor at the time, Theodosius, actually had enough gold and wealth available that he paid Attila off, and that turned Attila's attention to the west. And as he began attacking different barbarian kingdoms, he got closer and closer to Rome. Because of all of that, some treaties were confused, and when Attila thought he was allying with the Emperor Valentinian of Western Rome, he also thought he was marrying Valentinian's sister, Honoria, which was not actually the case. Regardless, Attila thought he was getting a new Roman bride, and when that didn't actually come through, he decided to invade Italy and Rome itself.
With Attila threatening the gates of Rome itself, Rome had a last-ditch effort at making peace with Attila and sent out Pope Leo, the Pope at the time, to engage in peaceful discussions.
No one knows exactly what Leo said to Attila, but we do know Attila turned around and left Rome. It's one of history's great mysteries, but to the people at that time, it was an act of God. And it's one of the many reasons why the office of the Pope has so much power and a belief in a connection to God throughout so much of history. But we'll unpack that more later on throughout this school year. In the meantime, while Attila never actually conquered Rome, in fact, he died just less than a year later, Western Rome was still suffering, especially because of these barbarian invasions triggered by the Hunnic invasions. And Rome's fall would happen just a few years later.
Historians attribute the official fall of the Western Roman Empire to 476 AD, when the barbarian leader Odoacer invaded Rome once again and deposed the emperor Romulus Augustus, seizing the Roman Empire for himself and creating something entirely different.
There's a little bit of historical irony here. The last emperor of Rome was Romulus Augustus. That name should be familiar because Romulus was considered to be the founder of Rome, going back in Roman mythology. And Augustus was the first true Roman emperor. How fitting that that is the last emperor in Roman history. But as we know, this was only a matter of time. There's so many reasons why. In fact, I think this is a great time to break out a chart. Let's go to the blackboard.
There are a number of different causes to the fall or steadily decline of Rome. The first are related to the military. Rome was just too big to defend, and it relied on mercenaries to defend its borders. That just is not an effective plan for stability. Politically, Rome's government was just so corrupt. It put too much power in the hands of emperors, and the officials of the Senate were too corrupt to do anything about it. And not to mention you have different rebellions and infighting within the city of Rome. Economically, because of a need of revenue, the Roman government relied on heavy taxation and slave labor, which led to an overcultivation of crops and just an ineffective economy overall that led to famine and debt. And finally, from a social perspective, Rome just wasn't what it once was. There was no patriotism or strength and honor or belief in the protection of the ideals that Rome was built on. And the upper class was far too selfish, and because of the inequalities, Rome could never sustain itself.
I don't see a lot of chocolate chip cookies here. In fact, I only see oatmeal raisin. The fall of Western Rome should not be a surprise. It was a long time coming for all of the aforementioned reasons. Now, let's go back to that quote from Tacitus. Here it is again. Now, anonymous student, who do you think Tacitus is talking about here?
Yeah, it's obviously the Huns or the Goths or whatever other barbarian you want to talk about there. It's pretty obvious.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. It's not. And it's an honest mistake. People make it every year, every time I teach this. Now, Tacitus is actually writing about 300 years before the events of the fall of Rome in 476. Tacitus is actually writing about Rome right about at its peak. So no, Tacitus is not outlining the greedy barbarians who supposedly invaded Rome and caused its downfall. No, Tacitus is talking about Rome itself. He references the overexpansion and the greed and that how through destruction Romans believed they had peace. This greed and this oversight that shows a problem in the Roman Empire and serves as a warning to every empire and state ever since. Be careful what you wish for. Be careful how you get it. Because what goes around in so many ways does come around. And from a Christian perspective, we also know that Rome was living in so much sin. And that greed and that selfish attitude, well, no wonder Rome eventually fell. Yet once again, how amazing is it that Rome is a perfect vehicle for Christianity to grow and spread? And in fact, while Rome fell, or more specifically, the Western Roman Empire fell, there's two things that live on. You see, in Western Europe, even though Rome is gone, the only unified authority left that almost everyone, including these barbarians, will turn to is the Christian church. And meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, well, thanks to some wheeling and dealing with Attila, it never did fall. In fact, it's been thriving. And the Eastern Empire will go by a different name. They'll be known throughout history as the Byzantines, and they too are built on Christianity. And so both the Christian Byzantine Empire as well as the Christian church itself will survive despite Rome's fall. And in many ways, Rome itself and the legacy and glory of that wonderful civilization will be preserved within. But that's a story for another day. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.